Hi and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take some miniatures from this fantastic set from WizKids and give them a little bit of an enhancement to make them pop just that much more. Want to see how it's done? Stay tuned and I'm going to show you. Before jumping into things, I want to stress that I'm approaching this from two different directions. There's going to be a grouping of some of these miniatures where it was really just a matter of a quick fix of doing a wash and some dry brushing. Then there's a secondary group of items that needed just a little bit more work. Regardless, the paints that I've used throughout this entire project are the ones shown here: Sunkissed Peach, Nutmeg Brown, Golden Sunset, Olive Green, and Granite Gray. I wanted to be sure you got some pictures of these straight out of the box, and as you can see, they look pretty good fresh from the box. There's some great details on here, and that's what I wanted to bring out with this particular video. So as you can see, there are some monuments, there's some statuary, and then you also have these great coffins. You get 4 of them, and the lids actually do come off for some storage, so there's going to be a little bonus project added in with the coffins themselves. Let's get started with the basic ones that just needed some washing and dry brushing. The first mini I worked with was this particular Tombstone, and as you can see here, it was really just a matter of giving it a good wash using Citadel's Nuln oil and then allowing that to dry completely. Once dry, I just went back in with the Granite Gray and did a nice light dry brushing to enhance the folds, the engravings in the tombstone, and the features on the 2 figures, and it really did make everything pop, and it was a very simple fix. The second mini I took care of was this kneeling statue, and really what I did with this guy is give him a wash in Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. When that was dry, I instead went to the Sunkissed Peach and did the same thing as before with just a nice light dry brushing, again to bring out all those fantastic folds in the robe of this figure. And when it's done, it really makes everything come out in more detail. When it comes to this figure in Repose Monument, again, you go back to that Citadel's Nuln oil and you're going to do a wash, and you really want to make sure with this one that you let the wash get into all the nooks and crannies, because there are some really great details that go missing if you don't. Once that has dried, go back to your Granite Gray and do a dry brushing. Be light-handed with this, and I actually found that a couple of rounds of dry brushing brought things out even that much more because of all the depths of the folds and the tassels that you have on the pillow. And when you do that, you're going to see a huge difference when it's done and dry. To add a little bit more to it though, I did go back to the olive green and stippled around, adding this moss-like effect to this figure as well. For the Cadaver Tomb and Mourner piece, what I basically did was take the lid off, because yes, this does open up and there's a little bit of open space in the top of this miniature. And while it does have a green hue to it, I decided to use the Nuln oil again and wash that. Make sure you get both pieces well coated, let it dry completely, move over to the Granite Gray, and you're going to do a dry brushing of this Granite Gray all over the piece and really focus on bringing out the enhancements of the folds in the Cadaver on the top part of the lid, as well as the details that go around the side of the tomb and the figure kneeling next to it. This is really what changed and enhanced the look of this particular mini. For what I called the Death's Embrace statue, it's again the same thing. Wash with the Citadel Nuln oil, let that dry completely, go back to your Granite Gray. In this case, you did do a dry brushing more on the statue form itself. I also brought it down into the pedestal, and you can very, very lightly go across where there are the vines and the leaves. Just don't be too heavy-handed, otherwise you will blot out the greens of the leaves on there. However, a very light touch will enhance the edge of those leaves instead. So again, very basic, simple fix to bring this guy's details out a little bit more. For this Pensive Statue on a pedestal, I actually took 2 different washes. For the form itself, I put the Agrax Earthshade. For the pedestal, I used the Nuln oil, both from Citadel. Allow those both to dry completely. Now you'll notice there is this moss-like look already on the form. which is why when you go into dry brush, it's going to tone it down a little bit, but it's going to make it look a little bit more natural as a result. So for the dry brushing, I just used the Granite Gray again everywhere. And even though you had the two different washes, the colors will still be there to show the difference between the stone of the statue and the stone of the pedestal. And you will still get that moss that has already been put on there. It's just not going to be as blatantly bright, and it's actually look like it's more grown into the stonework of this particular monument. Again, with this Arms Akimbo style statue, it was the same thing where the statue itself got the Nuln oil, and the base I did the Acrylic Earth Shade. When those were completely dry, the statue got the Granite Gray dry brush treatment, and the base, because of the stones, got the Nutmeg Brown as a dry brush treatment. And then just to enhance it a little bit further, I did use the Olive Green, and I put some in between the stonework as well as the folds of the statue's garment, just to have that moss growing onto the statue and the base as well. At this point, we're getting into the miniatures that needed a little extra enhancement to help improve how they looked or how they functioned. And the first thing I'm going to start with are these two angel statues, which look fantastic, have some really good details, but they won't stand up. I tried it a few times and they kept capsizing over. Essentially, it's a matter of creating more stable bases for these two figures, which is very easy to do. You're going to get some foam core, and I cut out squares that were a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. You can make it a little bit bigger if you so choose. Once you get the square cut out, make sure you give it some texture with a wire brush. You then want to hot glue these onto some cardboard. When the glue is set, you can then trim away the excess cardboard, and you're going to want to give these a base coat of black mixed with equal parts Mod Podge. Let that dry completely, and basically I did dry brushing of the first layer of Nutmeg Brown, then I did some Granite Gray, and then I went in with some of that Olive Green and I stippled that in for a moss-like look similar to that of the statues. While all of that was drying, I then turned my attention to the angel statues. They each got a good wash of the Nuln oil, allowed that to dry completely, and then they got a dry brushing with the Granite Gray. Once everything is dry and ready to go, you can attach the two pieces together with a dollop of hot glue on the base of the statue, press it against the new base that you created from the foam core, and you will now have a piece that will stand upright on its own and look like an angel standing on its slab of stone. For the Weeping Figure Tombstone, this is a figure that definitely needed a little bit more help simply because its paint job left it very flat, even though there are some really fantastic details in the sculpt. What I ended up doing was using the cosmetic wedge sponging technique, which if you look above, there is a link to a video showing you that exact technique. But essentially, starting with a Nutmeg Brown, I sponged this onto the entire piece. I then moved over to doing the same thing with Golden Sunset. Again, you're going to sponge this on. And then with a narrow paintbrush, I took the Olive Green and I basically just added that into the little indentations and the sides, again, to make it look like there's moss growing on the statue and on the stone. When all of that has dried completely, you then want to give this a wash with the Citadel Acrylic Earth Shade. Again, let that dry completely. When it is dry, what you're going to do is take your Granite Gray on the Tombstone section of this piece and dry brush. And when you do this, you're going to see all this really great detail that is in that tombstone that wasn't showing before. For the statue itself, I moved over to the Sunkissed Peach and again did a dry brushing. I do recommend you stay very light-handed with this because you don't want to overwhelm this particular piece, but do focus on the folds of the skirts as well as the pieces that you have falling over the front of the face and the back portion of this. And by doing all of this, you're going to see all this texture and detail that wasn't as easily seen before and really does enhance the final look of this particular miniature. And finally, we have our 4 coffins. These are very cool because you can take the lids off. There is some storage inside of them as a result. And I thought it'd be fun to add a little extra detail to this by giving this the option of putting bone piles inside of the coffin. So if your players take the lid off, they will discover the decayed bodies or the bones of someone in there, and you can add it into your story. Now, to make these bone piles, it's very easy. Just go out to a Dollar Tree or a Dollar General or a toy store in general this time of year especially, and just grab a bag of cheap toy skeletons. Scale does not matter as much in this case because we're kind of going to jumble these up and make it look like a really old pile of bones. What you do want to make sure you have is a strong pair of nippers to cut these things apart. You want to try and cut the bones so that you're cutting at joints to make it a little bit easier and to preserve the shape of the bone. The one thing I will say is that these coffins are shallow, so you have to be careful with how you place these bones together. So keeping that in mind, once you get everything sort of cut up, you want to create a base for these so that you can put the pile of bones on that and then move it into the coffin in and out so it's modular. To do that, I basically just took cereal box cardboard and I cut a piece of a rectangular shape that will fit inside the coffin. Do double check that before you get started. When that piece fits in, no problem, you can then start placing your bones however you so wish, really. The one tip I will give you is that keep in mind the height of the coffin is shallow, so as you're making these, make sure to put it back in and put the lid on just to double check that everything is still level enough for the lid to fit. I did find that I had to cut the back of the skulls off using the nippers just to keep it a little bit more flush with the other bones and not have it stick straight up. Otherwise, you would put the lid on and the lid will wobble. Once you get your bone piles established and hot glued onto this piece of cardboard, you are then going to take equal parts Mod Podge to black acrylic paint, mix it together and paint these pieces thoroughly and allow those to dry completely before we move on to the next steps for the coffins. While the bone piles were drying, I decided to enhance the coffins themselves because the paint job from the factory left them literally looking flat. There wasn't too much detail that was being enhanced. So again, going back to that sponging technique, I played around with those colors that I discussed in the very beginning of this video. For two of them, I started off using the Nutmeg Brown as the first round for the paint and the sponge painting technique. For the other two, I started off using the Granite Gray and then just go back and forth blending the colors. You really can't go wrong as long as you're using the colors shown before, as long as you leave the olive green out of the mix. So when you get your sponging technique onto these pieces and you're getting a more stone-like look to your coffins, make sure you let them dry completely before doing anything else. So really, while those are drying, you can go back to your bone piles. Taking Coffe Latte, you're going to take a wide flat brush and you're going to dry brush along the bones of your bone piles, and this is going to start bringing them out and enhancing the details of the bones themselves. Let that dry and then move over to Antique White. Same thing, you're going to enhance it and you're going to finish this up with a wash of Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. Let those guys dry, and chances are, as those are drying, your coffins will be ready for washes as well. Again, I was playing around with the colors here, so two of the coffins got the Nuln Oil, and the other two coffins got the Agrax Earthshade. As long as you're playing around with that color combination of the base group that I showed you, you really can't go too wrong with this. And then let this dry completely before we move on to the dry brushing. One thing I do want to stress about painting these coffins is to make sure that you do not paint the bottom of the lids or the inside of the coffins themselves, except for the bottom, because that's something we can add a little bit of detail if you wanted to. But the problem is if you start adding paint to the bottom of the lids as well as to the edges of the base of the coffin, they won't fit together nicely. So you do want to avoid trying to get any paint in those areas because you want to make sure you can still place the lid back into the coffin smoothly. The other thing I did while everything was sort of drying and getting established was I took this particular Citadel wash and I just dabbed the green into little nooks and crannies of these bone piles. You can get the same look using the olive green acrylic paint if you so choose. Just make sure you're very light-handed in doing so. Once everything is dry, wash-wise, you're going to see these definitely look more stone-like now. So to round it off, what I did was I took Sunkissed Peach, and on all four of those coffins, I just did very dry, light brushing. Again, focusing on the edges of the lid, focusing on the embossed parts at the base of the coffins, and it really just enhanced the look of these particular miniatures. And then as you can see here, here's what they look like with the bone piles stuck inside. And you can also trim away any little bit of excess cardboard if you want to, so the focus is more on the bone piles as opposed to the base of cardboard. So that's really how I went about enhancing the coffins and giving them their own unique look from this set as well. And here we have our final look for these miniatures. Again, these are miniatures that have some great details on it. It was just a matter of bringing them out a little bit more because the factory paint left it a little flat for some of them, or there was more that could be done in addition to the factory paint job. I hope this is something that you can put to use and helps you see how you can take these pre-painted minis and really amp up the look of their appearance. When it was all said and done, it did not take too long to do this at all. I think it was maybe about a 5-hour job between the various washes, waiting for things to dry, and then going back and dry brushing and adding adding in those extra details. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment down below, or you can email me at thecraftingmuse.email@gmail.com. I'm always happy to answer them for you. If you've liked this video, make sure to hit that like button, and you are welcome to subscribe while you are here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to bringing you more later on. That looks like a face. Try and see that now. See, there's a nose and the mouth and two eyes. We're just gonna do that. There we go. Yeah, that's still there. Creepy baby face looking over my shoulder from now on. And you can't unsee it. So, welcome to the loony bin. Hi, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take some miniatures, miniatures, don't you know? Oh, how you doing?
I like saying the same thing over and over again, just different ways, so I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're done. I'm done. So, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.